The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station, JVC Broadcasting Management, or its sponsors.
Welcome to Crime and Justice Radio, where we talk all things crime, justice, mayhem, and the courts with expert insiders and legal outcasts. Good evening, everyone. My name is Aida Leisenring, and I'm here with Bruce Barquette. How are you doing, Bruce?
Good evening, Ms. Leisenring. I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm well. Have you had coffee? I heard that Marty Tankliff gave you a little lip service about your first show. He said you needed a Red Bull.
Yeah, I don't drink Red Bull, and I don't drink coffee after breakfast usually, unless I'm doing something that requires attention late into the evening, which this won't. We're going to have an interesting show tonight, but before we get to that, I want to talk a little bit about who we are again, because I don't think everybody knows us. We are two criminal defense attorneys. We're partners at a firm with other partners and other lawyers. And I am a former prosecutor and also a former seminarian. I studied at the priesthood at some point in time. And you've had some different career choices over the course of your adult life, haven't you?
I have. Thanks, Bruce. You were going to... I didn't realize we were going to go there again. But before I became a lawyer, I was an editor of beauty and fitness at Elle Magazine. And you might laugh at that, but it actually taught me to make deadlines and write to a specific audience, which is helpful with juries. But my favorite thing I've possibly done, besides getting great acquittals on justified cases, was co-executive producing a TV show on ABC, which was a limited docuseries called The Last Defense. And we featured two very powerful cases of individuals on death row who had present tense, have very compelling cases of innocence. Darlie Rotier, a woman in Texas who spent 21 years for a crime of killing her children, which I don't believe she committed.
And she's still serving?
And she's still serving.
On death row.
And we hope she is exonerated and gets out one day. And then Julius Jones, who no one had heard of. He went in as a freshman in college with this lovely family. And I believe he was set up by informant testimony, which is actually the leading cause of wrongful convictions in death penalty cases. And since the show aired, no one had heard of Julius Jones, and now everybody is talking about Julius Jones, and he's up for clemency in front of the parole board this summer, so we hope to talk about him in the future. Maybe
we'll have him or one of his lawyers on as a guest.
Certainly.
It'll be it's a fascinating part of your career that not many people know about. We're going to have an interesting show tonight. A little touch on the issues of the week. We'll do a Chauvin update, of course, because there are summations. And we've got an awesome guest. Bruce actually knew her. I did not. And her name is Risco Lewis. She is known as Suffolk County's Deputy Police Commissioner. She is full of Risco-isms. She has, in my view, a very, very holistic view of law enforcement generally. She's got some exciting stories. Maybe she doesn't think they're exciting, but she had a GPS tracking device placed on her vehicle by the former chief, James Burke. So obviously that's very interesting. And she has been training police departments around the country on implicit bias. Excellent, excellent. And you'll do a little segment on over-regulated, over-policed America.
We hope to, but I can't promise I'm not going to run on with Risco.
Well, we'll see. Let's start off with the upcoming sentence of Thomas Spoda, who was the district attorney in Suffolk County for over a decade. He was convicted in federal court before COVID last year of obstructing justice and witness tampering involving his attempts to protect the chief of police, James Burke, from an FBI investigation where they were looking into his beating of a handcuffed suspect in the basement of a police precinct. Ended up that Thomas Spoda and a deputy of his got convicted. The U.S. Attorney's Office, the federal prosecutors, just came out and recommended 8 years in prison for Mr. Spoda and a $100,000 fine. and they talked about why that was necessary.
And who cares about the fine, right? I mean,
Well,
it's the prison time. I'll gladly pay as much money as I need. I will GoFundMe to avoid prison time.
Well,
but really, it's the 8 years.
The memo gave his estimated net worth, and without revealing it, I dare say he can afford the $100,000 easily. But the defendant, this is a quote from the sentencing memo from the federal prosecutor, Lara Tranis-Gatz, who prosecuted both him, McPartland, Burke, and for another part or another notch in her belt, Ed Mangano in Nassau County, the county executive.
Don't mess with Lara Gatz.
Do not mess with Lara. The defendant's, this is her quote to the court, the defendant's crimes corrupted the institution that they led for more than a decade, bringing disgrace and dishonor to their office and to their profession, undermining the public's faith in the concept of and belief in justice. As fixtures in the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office, leadership, the entire generation of prosecutors served in an institution tainted by their corrupt examples. Their crimes struck at the core of law and order, prosecutors with unparalleled power over criminal matters, secretly covering up the unlawful actions of a corrupt police officer while simultaneously threatening to exercise their prosecutorial authority over those who might expose him. Devastating language from the U.S. Attorney's Office. It'll be interesting to see what sentence he actually gets when that happens. I'm
actually curious because I think the guidelines, the guideline levels that he's at was actually recommending 57 to 70 months. So they're asking for more than the guidelines. Is that unusual?
It's not unusual after trial. But in this case, it seems to be justified. And they wrote a lengthy memo explaining why the sentence of 8 years. And you have to remember that Thomas Spota is in his upper 70s. An 8-year sentence for him in a federal prison.
I think he's 80.
Is he really? So that is not a light sentence by any stretch of the imagination. And it's, as you pointed out, in excess of where we were. Let's talk a little Derek Chauvin, if you will. We heard the jury charge today. We heard summations. We heard from the prosecutor and the defense. What's your take?
Well, I want to talk about the elements of what they ultimately have to prove, right?
You're going to be a lawyer for us.
I'm going to be a lawyer for a moment and educate the audience if they didn't hear me last week. He's charged with murder 2. That's the top count, carries 40 years. Murder 3, that's the second highest count, carries 25 years. And manslaughter in the second degree, and I think that carries 10 years. And in all 3 of those, the prosecution has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Derek Chauvin's actions caused the death of George Floyd. And I believe that even if there were other circumstances, say he had other medical conditions, that doesn't acquit him, right? If his actions substantially contributed to his death, they have then met the causation element. Now, in terms of the mens rea, so what was going on in the mind of Derek Chauvin while he was doing this, that's different with every count. For the highest count, it's odd. It's an unintentional killing while committing a felony. And here the underlying felony is felony assault, and you have to intend to commit that assault.
In New York, that would not be permitted. It's an interesting legal issue. If you're committing the assault as the felony and the assault causes the death, I don't think that the law would permit that to be a designated felony for the felony murder rule. But we'll see what happens in Minnesota. My take was the defense did I don't want to say a horrible job, but I thought they were poor. I thought there was no passion. I thought the defense attorney, while being professorial is helpful at times, he lacked any sense that he actually believed that Chauvin was innocent or that he should be acquitted. It sounded the whole time like he was trying to win on a technicality. And trying a case like this, you can't do that. You have to have passion. You have to believe in your client's innocence and convey that. And I thought the defense utterly failed to do that.
So I haven't watched the whole trial, but I did watch a lot of the defense's summation. I think it was like 15 million hours long, so I didn't get to watch the whole thing. But
we do have a day job after all.
Apparently, I actually have to work during the day as well. But I was actually really surprised, and I thought, with a case as bad as his, his closing was surprisingly powerful. His closing put fear into those that have been following this and really want a conviction. And here's what he did. He acted rational. He acted professorial. He acted like a tempered adult in the room, which is a strong contrast to what's going on outside the courtroom, right?
Country.
I mean,
Sure.
we heard, I don't know if this was over the weekend, that one of the defense experts' residences was sprayed with pig's blood and a pig's head carcass. It turned out not to be his home anymore.
They thought it was.
But they thought it was. So it's a stark contrast to it. But what the defense did that was so kind of slippery and clever was he shifted the focus from an objective, reasonable police officer standard to the subjective viewpoint of Chauvin without having Chauvin testify and without misquoting the law. And he did this repeatedly by showing like different circumstances that weren't seen in those 9 minutes, the 16 minutes that occurred before.
We have 30, almost 30 seconds. Give us your prediction. What's the verdict going to be, and when's the jury going to come back?
Hung jury on the top count, convictions on murder 3 and manslaughter 2. We'll see that by end of day tomorrow.
A hung jury by the end of the day tomorrow?
On the top count.
On the top count, they'll come back and say they're hung?
But who knows? Who knows? There'll be a conviction.
This is easy. This is easy from my perspective. He's going to get convicted. He's going to get convicted quickly. If we had a show to do Wednesday night, we'd have a verdict. We certainly will have a verdict by our next show next Monday night. Horrible defense. There you go. I said it. Horrible defense and devastating evidence. Mr. Chauvin's going to prison for the rest of his life.
Crime and Justice Radio is brought to you by the law firm of Barquette, Epstein, Kieran, Aldea, and Loturco, defending individuals accused of state and federal crimes, prosecuting the government for violations of your civil rights, fighting to overturn wrongful convictions, and seeking to make you whole if you've been injured in an accident. You can find them at www.barquetteepstein.com or call 516-745-1500. Barquette Epstein meets all your litigation needs from the Hudson to the Hamptons.
Welcome back to Crime and Justice Radio.
We're happy to be back. We have a great guest. Before we do that, I'm going to take a few seconds of personal privilege and brag a little bit about our law firm. We have a dozen or so really committed lawyers to representing people. As I say, we represent the accused. We seek mercy for those convicted. And every once in a while, we get to participate in the exoneration of the innocent. I'm proud of the lawyers that we work with, and I'm proud of the work that we do as defense attorneys and as attorneys who seek justice for those who have been violated by police brutality or excessive force. And we really do have connections from Manhattan all the way out to Montauk. With that, let's bring in our guest.
I'm going to introduce Risco Lewis. A little about her background. She has a BA in criminal justice and history. She has a law degree from Hofstra Law School. I believe she might have graduated with our managing partner, former Judge David Ayers. She started out as a prosecutor in Nassau County District Attorney's Office. I believe, Bruce, you were there for some period of time. We'll talk later about when you were adversaries, and apparently neither of you are willing to admit that you lost, but somebody had to. And she has been, I believe, since 2005, County Deputy Police Commissioner, first female and first person of color to hold the position. Risco, 12 years. 12 years.
2012,
okay.
Yeah.
Correct me. Risco, thank you so much for coming to our show.
My pleasure.
How are you doing?
I'm well. The only thing I have to add is I always add my maiden name, Mention, because my mother raised me after my father died. So I'm Risco Mention Lewis.
I almost did that. So
welcome. It's great to see you again. And we did. We knew each other back in the day when you were a prosecutor and I was a defense attorney.
Yes, I was young. You could put that in.
Yeah. I didn't want to say you were young then because it would imply that you're not young now. And you certainly are still in the prime of your career. As a prosecutor, you initially started off doing typical prosecutorial things, bringing people to trial, plea bargaining, arguing motions and sentencing, and then you branched off into something different called the STAR program. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I was a regular prosecutor trying cases until 1993. I worked then DA Dennis Dillon was the DA at the time.
My boss too.
Yep, and great man. One of my favorite mentors that I ever had. Even when I was in the courtroom, I was a regular prosecutor, but I also would, if I noticed young people coming back and forth to court and they weren't prepared, I would ask the defense attorney to let them wait for me until I was done, and then I'd sit them outside and explain to them in simpler terms exactly what was expected of them, so they'd come back prepared. And that turned into DA Dennis Dillon, everybody kind of noticing that I had a penchant for, just helping people prepare for court properly because they weren't prepared.
So I want to ask you about that because as a defense lawyer, if a prosecutor says to me, hey, mind if I talk to your client for a minute? I'd say, yeah, I mind. Get away from me. But
and get away from my client.
It turned out that you did an incredible amount of good, and I believe it was through, I want to say it was community court or youth court, but you dealt with young people. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so because I was asking so much for the teens to talk to me, mainly, I'll be honest with you, a lot of African-American males didn't come. Weren't that many Latinos come to court back then, but young people of color didn't have parents with them. Sometimes they didn't have help, or just any kid that I came to court and they'd come back unprepared. I guess people started noticing that I started pulling them aside, and so I asked, maybe the district court supervisor, I don't know how it happened. I asked, could I work in the community court and pull just those kids 24 and under, young people 24 and under, and give them contracts to come back to court better prepared. So as opposed to then getting a record, say if they said they wanted to go back to school, you had to get back in school, you had to get a job. Whatever you said you wanted to do to change your life, that would be the contract to get a better deal in a case with me.
So what kind of give us examples of what kind of a contract or what you would do to...
Go ahead. Sorry. And we want the results. How did you do with the program? How did the program do?
Yeah, very extremely well. I had very few kids. I don't think I had any, actually, who didn't do what they were supposed to do.
And how about recidivism?
I had, for the time that I did the cases, I had zero. For the times I did the cases. I can't speak for after. I did have a funny situation with one young man. As a matter of fact, he called me just 2 months ago. His mother called me. That's how long people stay connected to me. Anyways, this young man, he was in court, and you remember he became a judge, but he was a defense attorney before that. He always used to give out stickers. Nicest guy in the world. However, when he became a judge, he became a real...
more difficult.
Yeah, there you go. And this kid was trying really hard, troubled, kid, but trying really hard. He got a job at Target. He came in his uniform. He came a little late because he was coming from work. And the judge just lambasted him publicly, lambasting him. And the kid turned to me. He was very respectful to the judge. He turned to me and said, Miss Lewis, thank you very much for all you've done, but I'm never coming back here. Wow. And he went to jail ever since then until he went to federal prison.
Wow.
And so, the important part is for the time he was with me, he did everything he was supposed to do. But that situation turned him. So most of the people I did really well. And many of them I still have contact with.
That's spectacular. We have to stop and think about that for a second. No recidivism. We're talking about enforcement, but also crime prevention, turning people around, and you were able to do that. Unbelievable. And then you went to work for the Suffolk County Police Department as a Deputy Police Commissioner. Tell us about how you got the job.
So I was a prosecutor under Dennis Dillon and then under DA Rice, who's now Congresswoman Rice. We did an initiative called the Terrace and Bedell Initiative, which, crazy as this is going to sound, people, what they did was Terrace and Bedell is 40, 50, 60 years of crime, violent crime, murders. It is really the kickoff point for all violent crimes, basically was at the time in Nassau County.
Absolutely.
And so DA Rice came in. She said, okay, how do we change this? So what they did is they did a big sting. They went after all the drug dealers. They followed the drugs, which people always say, get the drugs, get the drug dealers in the cartel. They went all the way to Colombia, took out the cartel, And what they discovered was the drugs on the corner didn't change. And so that didn't work. And so she said, what else can we do? She went to John Jay College of Criminal Justice. They came up with this thing called custom notifications and call-ins. A call-in where so then we went through all the drug dealers, the one who created violent crime, you put them in jail. But the ones who didn't, you had them come to a community meeting where they could confront you by the community with video of them committing crimes. But they were not arrested.
Wow. And then from that, you were recruited to be a deputy police commissioner.
And we're going to talk about that when we get back shortly. I want to ask you about some of your times dealing and confronting gangs as well.
Oh, it's fascinating. Wait till you hear this. Wait till you hear this right after the break. And this true crime prevention in a way that a number of communities would benefit from. Right after we come back from our short break, we'll talk to Deputy Commissioner Lewis again.
Welcome back to Crime and Justice Radio. I'm Aida Leisenring. I'm here with Bruce Barquette, and we are talking to Risco Lewis, Suffolk County Deputy Commissioner. Right before break, we were talking about a program that I had to ask you questions about on the break because I find it fascinating and I was confused. Custom notifications and call-ins. What exactly is that?
So, across the country, there's researchers have done research on what works in policing. And one of the things that works for shooters in particular, but also drug dealers, is a thing called a call-in. And a call-in is when you bring in 20, 22, 24 people who are prolific violators, right? And then you bring them into a room. In that room, you bring in the DA, tell them what the ramifications will be for if they get arrested again. The police department telling them what they have on them, what they're willing to do to them. The U.S. attorney telling them the federal time they will get. A parent or mother who's lost their child maybe to drug overdose, or a parent who's lost their child to gun violence. And then a reformed person who's changed their life, and usually an agency that has resources. You bring them into a room, and at the end of it all, you give them a picture. They open up an envelope with a picture and the time, a picture of them from their being arrested, and then on the back you put the time they're going to get if they commit another crime of that type. And then what we used to do is make sure there's resources available for them.
But so if I'm understanding this right, it's basically an intervention, but instead of being amongst your family and friends, you're around every layer of law enforcement imaginable, but that person doesn't get arrested. He gets the help, the warnings, the information he or she needs. And then what?
And then what I've set up is things we call, leadership teams, where different agencies come together to give them the resources they need. So I created CODA out of this, which is a life plan, 45-day plan. What do you want to do in your next 45 days?
And CODA stands for Coalition of Thought and Action, right?
Council of Thought and Action, because we meet in a circle once a week. Every Wednesday we still meet. But that started in 2008 on Terrace and Bedell.
And so this custom notifications, which I call your legal family intervention, did it work?
So
the
call-in is when they come to the room.
Yep.
And a custom notification is what we do in Suffolk is, say that someone, we know two groups of people are shooting at each other. It's very rare that you'll catch a shooter, It's very rare you'll catch someone commits murder. I know that sounds crazy, but you don't. Because they're usually shooting other people who would be willing to commit murder. And so what you do is you go to their door. If you hear about it, you see it on social media, you knock on the door with a letter usually from me, the inspector and his staff go, along with a community member, and they give them the letter saying, we know what you're doing, we know where you are, we know what's going on, and we need you to stop because we want you to live. But if you decide to continue, these are the ramifications.
But were you knocking on doors as deputy commissioner?
Yes.
Okay, so
I still do. Yeah.
So you still do. So I gather it's not really a desk job for you.
No, it was never a desk job for me. I think for my first 2 years, they wondered if there really was a deputy because I was always on the corner.
Not what we expect to hear from a deputy police commissioner.
Hanging on the corner again.
Yeah, that's where the crime is. That's where you got to be, right?
So, if you're a beat cop, not if you're the deputy commissioner.
How are you going to know what's going on the ground if you never see it?
And so tell us what you did.
So when I first came to Suffolk, I think I spent a lot of time in Wyandanch was the primary area, but I went to a lot of areas. Spent time on the corners, spent time in the park. Same as I've ever, whatever job I had as an assistant DA, that's what I would do. I would go to the corner, talk to the guys, talk to the community, find out what's going on. But in Suffolk, I go to the corners, talk to the guys on the corner. Why are you out here? What would you need to change your life, and what would you be willing to do? Do you know that we know what you're doing, and you're probably going to go to jail? And is this the life you want?
Wait a second. Let's stop for a second. Guys on the corner. It sounds like people.
Sellers.
So you're walking up to drug dealers and gang members as a deputy police commissioner and saying to them, "Hey, we know what you're doing. What do you want to do to change your life?" And they know who you are.
Yeah, I say my name first. I say hello. If they never, when I first came, I would just have my ID. And I'd show them who I am, and they were always polite.
Badge and a gun?
I know.
No, ID. I have an ID. I rarely wear my badge back then. I would just have my ID.
Do you have a gun?
No, I don't need a gun. I always say, what prosecutor needs a gun?
I don't need a gun.
We have our words. Words are way more powerful than a gun.
What would you wear? I'm a girl. I have
my
to
uniform.
know. So you'd wear your
what
uniform?
I have on now, my suit.
Right.
I don't have a uniform. I wear my suit. I walk up. I say hello.
And how were you received?
First, people were like, "What the hell?" Now, of course, they were like, what? Like confused.
Were you by yourself?
Of course, yes, by myself.
And you'd get out of your car and just approach.
Get
and
out
say,
of my car and
"What's
say,
up?"
"Hi, how you doing?" Introduce myself, shake hands. Not during COVID, but shake hands. Say my name. Say I know that this is an area where crime happens and drug dealing has happened. Or I know that you guys are such and such gang. At least I hear that about you. What would it take for you to change your life? What would you like? How would you like? Is this the life you want? I tell you, as a prosecutor, the number one thing I would say to guys, if I ask people, what do you think the number one I'd say to defendants to make them knees buckle and them cry. And the number one thing wasn't a sentence. It was, you deserve a better life than this.
I
can imagine.
I
can only imagine
Yep.
doing that. I mean,
and it's treating someone with respect.
Humanity.
Makes them just buckle their knees, like you said, and cry because
They expect me to be tough.
Right.
They expect that, but they don't expect me to see their humanity.
Were you ever able to prevent a shoot? Some of these were gang members, right?
Yes.
And so you'd get calls from time to time and information. Were you ever able to obviously there was a recidivism reduced, so you prevented crime that way, but were you ever placed in danger? Did you ever go out on the field when you thought someone was going to get hurt?
No, I don't think so. I mean, when I thought, one thing we need to realize is people who shoot people shoot within a small social network. It's about 1/2 or maybe 1% of an entire, even of the criminal population, they're only 1% of that population. So criminals shoot each other. They don't shoot regular citizens usually, unless, they make a mistake. So they're shooting one another. So they're not looking to shoot a deputy police commissioner. They're looking to shoot each other.
And so what do you do if you hear that that's going to happen? Or
So
what have you done?
we intervene. I haven't, we would get a call or find out about somebody, see something on social media, get their name so we know the social network. Say Bruce Barquette's social media, right? Social network, right? Aida's social network, and we go to your door and we know who your friends are. We knock on your friend's door and your door and give you a letter from me stating we know what's going on. We want you to live. We bring a community member like a pastor or a football coach to say the same thing to you, that we want you to live. And then we go to your friends, and then we go to Bruce's group and his friends. And the idea is, even if the shooter is a hothead, it gets the other people who don't want to shoot anybody an excuse to say pause. A lot of times, young people, we've all been in situations where people are telling us to do something, we don't want to do it, but
I tell Bruce to pause all the time. You have no idea
True
how many
facts.
times.
True fact.
you're
In
influencing
court, during trial, on a phone call.
You're influencing you influence his social network. So the idea is to influence the social network. And when we were doing that in Wyandanch, up until 2018 with I can't say my favorite inspector, but he's now a chief, Deputy Chief Lewis.
I think 2000. You just did say your favorite.
I didn't. I said I can't say that. There were 0 shootings in 2018.
So I was going to ask you, does it work?
It definitely works, but you got to be consistent on it. You got to keep your ears to the ground. You've got to have good intel. You can't just stop random cars on the street. You got to know whose car you're stopping.
And do you have people helping you with this? Is there a staff? Are there other people?
Yes, of course. We just had different precincts right now. An inspector. Right now we have a system in place where the inspector or the field intelligence officers or whomever will hear about an incident or a conflict going on of shooters. Say there's the first shooting, then they figure out who's doing the shooting. We suspect is doing shooting, and then the inspector with a community member. Inspector with say, another officer or community member go to the person's door with the letters and knock on their doors. We just reignited this process again, and the idea is that and think about it. When you were a kid, if someone knew what you were doing, would you do it?
Well, me or a reasonable
Not
me?
me.
You wouldn't
as soon
have
as
got-
I'm pre-busted, I'm ending that.
You wouldn't have got where you are if you did.
True enough.
So-
Look, there's so much we want to talk to you about, and I want to move through some of this because one of the interesting facts of your career is that you were the target of Burke and Spoda. They placed a GPS tracking device on your vehicle.
Yes.
Did you know that at the time?
No, I didn't know about the tracking device. I knew I was being physically followed.
How'd you learn you were being physically
Because I
followed?
would see people in police vehicles following me, not unmarked vehicles following me.
So this is stunning when you stop and think about it. You're the deputy police commissioner, the district attorney, and the police chief are tracking your whereabouts. What was their thought process, if you know? Why were they doing it? What were they afraid you were doing?
I can't say that Spoda was involved because I don't know. All I know is from the U.S. attorneys, right? That's all I know from, right? I only saw the people behind me. I didn't know who was behind it. I suspected I knew who was behind it. But what I thought at the beginning phases of it was they're going to have a long-ass day because I would be out in the streets all day and at night.
And apparently you weren't great with directions, right? So they
No.
were doing a lot of U-turns,
Yes, definitely.
burning through gas.
As quiet as it kept.
Look, I have to ask. You're African American, you're a woman, and you're in Suffolk County doing this creative, effective policing, and they're following you.
Well, at the time, they did not know it was effective. They just thought it was creative. But I don't know why they were following me. I just think, I don't know why. I don't care why. The bottom line is, it was uncomfortable, to have somebody sitting outside your house watching your home. It became a little scary. But
How'd you find out that they put a GPS tracking device on your
from
car?
the U.S. attorney, from the court papers.
During the trial?
During the trial, yeah.
So you didn't know that whole time?
No, I didn't know.
Unbelievable.
But I suspected. I mean,
How did that make you feel?
truth be told, I was embarrassed.
Why?
I was just embarrassed that people knew that these things were happening. I thought it was bad for the department. I thought it was bad for our reputation, and I was embarrassed by that.
We're going to get your take on the Spoda upcoming sentencing, and I want to hear about your implicit bias training across the country as soon as we come back from this very short break.
Crime and Justice Radio is brought to you by the law firm of Barquette, Epstein, Kieran, Aldea, and Loturco, defending individuals accused of state and federal crimes, prosecuting the government for violations of your civil rights, fighting to overturn wrongful convictions, and seeking to make you whole if you've been injured in an accident. You can find them at www.barquetteepstein.com or call 516-745-1500. Barquette Epstein meets all your litigation needs from the Hudson to the Hamptons.
Welcome back. This is Bruce Barquette with Aida Leisenring, and we're interviewing Deputy Police Commissioner Risco Lewis. Right before the break, we talked a little bit about the GPS device that was illegally placed on your vehicle by the Suffolk County Police Department, and we now know behind it was Chief of Police Burke and Thomas Spoda, the DA. The U.S. Attorney's Office, I think on Friday, came out and recommended 8 years in prison for Mr. Spoda. What are your thoughts?
Not my monkey, not my circus. If they believe that that's the time he has to serve, and that'll be the judge's decision, just like any other trial we ever have or case we ever have as prosecutors.
You don't have any view at all on what appropriateness or what would be an appropriate sentence for them?
No, I don't have all the details. I don't know.
Now, let me ask you, Burke, who actually was responsible for putting the tracking device in your car and who, I guess, one of the police officers testified wasn't fond of you. He was sentenced to 44 months. How did you feel about his sentence, and how did you feel about him going to jail?
I knew he had to go for the good of society, in a sense. I hope he became a better man there. And maybe he disliked me. I don't know that he did. I didn't dislike him. I don't dislike him now. And I always wished him the best. And that's how I felt about him.
And did you communicate that ever to him?
Yeah, a woman I knew was going to see him at one point, and I told her to tell him that I, this is going to sound crazy, but 7 loving thoughts, and I wish him the best.
That's not crazy. I think you forgive people, you live a better life, and you help them become better people. So
I didn't have to forgive him because I don't never think of things as personal. I didn't think it was about me. It was about other people's need for power or need to feel manly or whatever their reasoning was. Sometimes things impact you, but they're not about you. And so that's how I looked at it as, flaws in his personality that he had to reconcile. And Spoda have to reconcile. And all those people, they have to reconcile the flaws in their character.
So you were in Ferguson, Missouri?
Yes.
Training the police department there on implicit bias.
Yes.
Talk to us about that.
So implicit bias is the idea that we all have preconceived notions that we gain through our experiences throughout life, right? Great example of that is I can give you 10 logos of Chase, Pepsi, etc., and I don't have to say the name. You're going to know what the logos are. Why? Because you're always getting information. If you Google right now nursing, you're going to see females. If you Google CEO, you're going to see men, and you're also going to see white nurses and white men, white women. And so the idea is we're constantly being inundated with information from society, and so implicit bias is an understanding that information, you don't want to act upon that information you're receiving, and you need to check your biases at the door.
And so how does that work in the police department?
Well, what it does is I like to say that a lot of people think it's going to cure bias. It doesn't cure bias. What it does is it doesn't move the needle. It lets them know there is a needle, that you do have bias, that we all have bias, and that you may get bias from one call to the next, and you need to take a pause and think about it. That's what the training does. It says you have bias, pay attention to that bias, and pause before you allow it to check your pause in a sense.
This has really been a fascinating few minutes with you. I want to thank you for coming. It's been great. I want to caution my conservative friends not to jump to conclusions here about community policing or whatever tag they might put on the work that you've done. And remember this, it has worked. Crime has been reduced. We would all benefit from paying more attention to what Deputy Commissioner Lewis has been doing and what she's been working on here, from the implicit bias that she just spoke about to the law enforcement techniques she used.
The interesting thing about you don't have to take my word for it. You can do your own research. Everything I do is research-based and data-driven. I don't make stuff up when I'm home at night sleeping. I do my research and say what drives down crime, what reduces violence, what reduces recidivism, and that's what we're here to do. That's what police are here to do. And I think of it like parenting. No parent just takes out their belt. Every time a kid does something, you take out the belt. Remember, arresting people is basically taking out the belt. And so the question is, what else would you do? You'd use the corner, you'd talk to them, you'd get them some counseling if they need it. And these are the tools of policing. All the tools of policing, intelligent departments like Suffolk County Police Department are data driven.
And once you've taken out the belt, you've already failed because the incident, the illegal activity, or the bad behavior, if you're talking about your kid, has already occurred. You want to get to the point where that does not happen, and that's what you're trying to do. It's great work that you're doing. It's God's work, if I can say that. Keep it up. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much. Deputy Commissioner, please come back again, and wish you the very best.
We have a very interesting show for you next week, and we want to take a moment or two to highlight that. Aida?
Okay, so next week we're going to hear from Ron McAndrews, and I'll tell you who that is in a moment, but here's why it matters. Biden's bid has been to end the federal death penalty. Right now there are 47 federal death row inmates. That's 13 less than we had in the beginning of the year when William Barr rapid fire executed 13 people that have been on death row for over decades. In the state system, we have over 2,500 inmates on death row. Studies suggest that 4% are innocent. That's over 100 innocent inmates scheduled to be executed. So who is Ron McAndrews? He was a warden in Florida who personally executed 3 men and changed his mind about the death penalty entirely, has been an anti-death penalty advocate. He has many peers that have been through the same exact thing. He's testified in front of the United Nations, and he's also a prison consultant and professor. We're going to play a short clip of him right now.
Anyone who gets up close to an execution, physically touches the person they're getting ready to kill, speaks to them, communicates with them, shares their most intimate thoughts in those last few minutes of their life, and then takes them into this dirty little room and kills them. If they can honestly say that that person doesn't come back to visit them from time to time, they're not human.
That is chilling. I can't wait to hear from Ron McAndrews next week, who will be able to talk to us about his experiences executing individuals, how that changed him, and how he's now trying to change society and change the death penalty.
And we're going to hear, people think executions are impersonal, but we're going to hear about the preparation that goes into it. Executioners have to spend the next 30 days training the inmates about what's going to happen.
And a botched execution?
And who knows, maybe we'll have information about Matt Gaetz, or maybe Bill Cosby's appeal will come in. Let's not forget the trifecta of sex cases with Bill Cosby and
Harvey
Weinstein.
And up and coming from...
Who knows? Every week something new happens in crime.
And we'll have a Chauvin verdict to chat about, no doubt, by a week from today. We'll see how that goes. Aida, it's been great fun.
Great talking to you, Bruce. See you next week.
The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station, JVC Broadcasting Management, or its sponsors. Management or its sponsors. Management or its sponsors. Management or its sponsors. Management or its sponsors.